Hello, if you're a living, breathing human being, there is a nearly completely certified chance that you are a part of some sort of sociological group. If you aren't, how? For instance, the groups I'm part of is being cool as fuck, hot as fuck, and being asthmatic. But you are, for instance, part of the groups such as being stupid, being a doo-doo baby, or being someone who enjoys Friday Night Funkin' mods. Horrifying. Everybody in some way is part of some type of sociological group, be it cultural, ethnic, religious, political, social, class, sexual orientation, gender, disability. We as human beings really fucking love to divide people into categories and label them. There is utility in groups, yet there is also ways it can be used maliciously. And the main place we dumb apes learn about the groups we've decided to say are different from each other is in media. Well, I suggest you to touch grass and talk to a person for once in your miserable life. We can't be expected to get to know every single group of people on planet Earth in our lifetime, so we experience some groups through media, which is why how we represent groups is important. While discussions of representation in media focuses on minority or marginalized groups, and this video will as well, it's important to keep in mind that every single character in media represents something. Every character is a statement, and there's no escaping that. Every character either subverts or perpetuates societal expectations. If you've viewed my channel for maybe 2 or even 3 seconds, you may notice that I like to particularly focus on representation, ignore the several hundred Guilty Gear uploads. It's a topic I'm quite passionate about. I've even written on it academically throughout my time at university, but this video will outline my way of analyzing representation in media based upon research, talking and listening to industry professionals, to people of different marginalized groups, and my own perspective. Think of it like a helpful little guidebook you can refer to when you're like, is this pasty white boy truly goated with the sauce? But if you need further convincing that I am a reputable source, my name is Rad Chad, the Mad Lad, and to some of you, your dad. And welcome to Why Representation Matters. When we have discussions about representation in media, we are usually talking about the representation of minority, marginalized, or generally unrepresented groups. Some hot examples you've probably seen are things like African Americans, LGBTQ+, and gamers. There are very real injustices groups can face, but you may be wondering, how does showing these groups in media help them? Oh yay, now they can point at the screen and go just like me for real and pog. However, this shows how naive you are. Akin to a mewling dog, I pity your ignorance and how little you understand the worthless speck that you are in a grander universe of knowledge. There are 2 main reasons representation is important, which I will call the outgroup effect and the in-group effect. Starting with the outgroup effect, this is the representation's effect on audience members, not within the group that is being represented. The positive outgroup effect representation can have is presenting these groups to people who may not usually engage with them. Us insane monkeys get scared and throw rocks whenever we meet someone slightly different to what we expect. So having a group be normalized before you even meet them helps a lot. I myself was raised in a very white town, and I know for a fact if it wasn't for media, I would scream if I saw a black man. You might not have met a bipolar person, Bill from Mississippi might not have encountered a gay person, and hell, with how oppressed and underrepresented they are, you probably have never met a gamer in your life. If a group is represented authentically and competently, it will allow people outside of these groups an insight to the blights of a group and strengthen understanding for them. But mostly it humanizes groups, makes them feel less like an other. As an example of this effect, back in college I had an Australian friend who was very homophobic. He'd go, "Oh, it's so gross, it's not normal," and I was like, that's so gay, bro. But then one day he came into class and was like, "Hey, man, I heard Gandalf was gay, so I guess gay people are pretty cool." I'm pretty sure he meant Dumbledore, but still, old gay wizards were able to bring my friend back from the brink of homophobia. Now keep in mind that the opposite effect can happen. If we present a group negatively, it can create prejudice. If we present a group unauthentically or incorrectly, people will have misguided beliefs that do not line up with the reality of that group. Essentially, the purpose of the outgroup effect is to normalize groups to people not of that group and build empathy towards them. Let us move on to the in-group effect. The effect representation has on audience members within the group being represented. There are a variety of people on Earth who have vastly different experiences due to what social groups they fall into or conditions that affect them. For these people, it's important to have an authentic story or character to represent them. It's not only cathartic, but also allows an exploration of their experiences. Being a part of a social group can have profound effects on the way we live and can shape who we are. It can also make people realize that they are even part of a group. Someone kept away from the knowledge of what a transgender is, but is still transgender, will see a transgender on a screen and go, holy shit, transgender. In this economy? It can celebrate being a part of that group, make it easier for you not only to accept yourself in that group, but love yourself. The in-group effect is to allow people of that group to be seen, to be celebrated, to explore the struggles of their group, and to realize they may even be a part of that group. That's the essentials of it. That's why representation is important. GG, video over. You can go become a puddle of mucus or whatever you do when you're not watching the only good content on YouTube. While that is why it's important, what even is good representation? Well, this is where it gets more complicated, since representation is so broad, it can have caveat upon caveat upon caveat. But I've collected a couple of variables representation can be judged by. So welcome to Why Representation Matters, and how to do it goodly. Authenticity refers to how respectfully constructed the character is, ranging from offensive stereotype to authentic representation of the group. Being inauthentic can spread and reinforce prejudiced views towards the group, while authentic representation can create respect and understanding. This one should be the most obvious element that affects the quality of representation. You want your character to actually represent the group properly. For instance, Miles Morales is very influenced by his cultural background. He authentically has the swagger of a black teen, while an example of an offensive stereotype are the random gay guys from Persona 5, perpetuating the fear that gay people want to violently kiss every man they see. Fearing this is pussy shit. Lock lips like a real man. But it should be noted that something using stereotypes of a group doesn't necessarily mean it's harmful. Speedy Gonzalez, very obviously inspired by Mexican stereotypes, is loved by Mexican people. This is because it doesn't put down or misrepresent the group. It's not super authentic, it won't tell you about all the in-depth nuances of living as a Mexican, but it's an enjoyable character, and there's nothing wrong with that. We like to embrace silly stereotypes of our culture, laugh at overgeneralizations. The problem's only when these overgeneralizations turn into real expectations from people outside of that group, or if it perpetuates harmful stigmas. Marginalized or minority groups do be struggling. It's sort of the whole reason we have those terms. It's important to show struggles so people not of the group can empathize with them, and there are struggles that you wouldn't know about unless you were a part of the group, like the elusive chaser for transgender people, the non-existence of ramps for disabled people, and mum unplugging the Wi-Fi for gamers. But shitty media creators can go overboard with the prompt minority struggling, and show them set on fire, beat up, hung, thrown in a ditch, divorced, having their Reddit account banned, then exploding all simultaneously. Essentially, torture porn that glorifies the struggles of a group. A creator should understand intimately the group they're representing, because even if they have good intentions, they can misrepresent the actual struggles the group faces. We want to show the authentic struggles of these groups, because that leads to those struggles actually being addressed. And if we represent struggles in a way that is hyperbolic, bad actors can go, minority isn't actually set on fire and have flesh stripped from the skin. The libtards strike again. So we want to show struggle authentically and not delve into torture porn. Story power refers to what role does a character play in the story, the lead, side, supporting? For a lot of marginalized or underrepresented communities, when they finally get to sneak into media, it can commonly be in the form of a brief appearance or a side character. Heck, sometimes them being a part of that group isn't even mentioned. For instance, the transgender Barbie in the Barbie movie. Thank God trans people can now stand in the background of other stories. Did you see those gay guys dancing in the background of Encanto? Finally, gay people weren't allowed to dance before. The less story power your character has, the less you can explore the groups they represent. But vice versa, the closer they are to being the main character, the deeper you can explore the groups they represent, but also the depth the character has to offer. While a side character has a limited time to get their point across and could end up being wholly defined by a group they represent, not allowing for the depth they deserve. This was covered in depth in my Autistic Babes video, where I talk about autistic babes. So basically, the more story power your representative character has, the more you can explore the groups that make up the character, while giving them due nuance. I am unsure if this is as much of a problem now, but it was quite common in older media to put certain groups in the villain roles, if they didn't like them or if they were scared by their mere existence. For instance, a shocking twist in slashers was, they were a man wearing woman's clothes. Why would a man do that? Those are for women, not man. What the fuck? Or in Disney movies with very strongly gay-coded villains based off of drag queens or just the zestiest among us. But this also backfired because then those Disney villains were the most entertaining parts of the movies and people loved them. Yes, if one group is overly being misrepresented as evil, that is bad. And especially if they're bad because of the group they're a part of, like Black Manta being evil because he's autistic. That's really fucking dumb. But being evil doesn't necessarily mean they have to be hateable or that you can't root for them. Like Lord Boxman and Professor Venomous are great, but it's worth bringing up since it has been a problem in the past. Do you know what's even more detrimental than representing a group poorly? Not showing them at all. You know, it's kinda hard to give examples for this because there wouldn't be any. If a group isn't represented at all, there's no discussion, there's no exploration. How many Aboriginal characters are there? What about Uyghur Muslims? An eye-opening moment for me to the power of visibility is when I was shown, despite being a part of the Avengers, there's mysteriously very little Black Widow merch. And in merch with the whole Avengers lineup, she's just missing. This sends a message to young girls that even if they like the Avengers, you aren't their target audience. This is the boy zone. Get your cooties out of here. Ooh, gross. And even though there's no reason enjoying media should be restricted by gender, this was a weirdly staunchly held belief, reinforced by this funny as fuck petition I found. Boys do not want female superheroes in their stuff, and men, as a dad, really concerned about boys' psychology. We want to make them happy and confident regarding their superhero as their good male figure without disappointment of the existence of female character. We need boys to be boys in order to become men that can contribute to society, and that aren't ashamed to be a man. 10 backers. Wait until they learn women have the ability to breathe air. Boys will be so ashamed and confused that they'll suffocate. Rectifying visibility can get quite tough because they inherently aren't a part of the discussion. There could be a group of people having the most atrocious time right now, but they're just kicked out of the media sphere. This is a point that goes beyond representation. It's an even deeper discussion about the power of media and what we do and don't show. But I'm a funny man, and just want to talk about why we need more autistic trans babes, or something like that. So just know visibility is really fucking important and goes deeper than what I discussed here. Remember that a reason we want representation is to allow empathy and visibility towards marginalized groups. Though keep in mind that really we should try and represent everyone, because everyone deserves to be seen, except Dave. But there are groups that are more pressing for support. I want to talk about a fascinating example that is very close to home for me, as in my home country, New Zealand. You see, in New Zealand there are the Māori, those who are descendants of the native iwi of New Zealand, and the Pakeha, those of pasty European descent. These terms aren't offensive, they are a respected way to differentiate the groups. Thanks to classic British colonialisation, then years of systemic oppression, Māori are at a socio-economic disadvantage, and even recently they're beginning a culture war over the inclusion of Māori customs in our country. It's very important that they are celebrated and seen in media. And there are some solid examples in games like Mad Maggie from Apex or Coupe in Civilization 6. This isn't to say that it's perfect all the time though, because, you know, people keep stealing culturally sensitive tattoos for their games because they look cool, and don't even get me started on Bionicle. But Pakehan games? There are no Pakehan games. In fact, when New Zealand Europeans are presented in games, they are just turned into Australians. Because the rest of you uncultured fucks can't tell a Kiwi apart from an Aussie. Sniper from TF2 was born in the lost land of New Zealand, but was shot out and raised as an Australian. And even when Call of Duty made a character based on the real-life war hero, one of the few people from New Zealand who actually actually did a thing. Charles Upham, they made him fucking Australian. And now while this is a personal attack on me as a New Zealand European, since Pakeha aren't marginalised, it's not as pressing to represent us properly in media. However, I am insulted at how much we are compared to Australians and will not forgive you. But it's more important, based on real life circumstance, that Māori get authentic representation. So remember, in terms of representation, we need to think about who is the most pressing to represent in media to garner empathy and understanding from general populaces. Story sovereignty follows the saying, nothing about us without us. Essentially saying if you were going to talk about a group, someone of that group should be involved and have control over how they're represented. I am a big believer in artistic freedom, so I'm not going to break your kneecaps for not giving complete control over to someone of a group when you talk about that group. But I think if you really want your representation to be authentic, it's important to have someone of the group in the creative process, and the more involved the better. I also like the idea of normalizing including people of a group in the creative process about their group, because frankly I don't trust some of you idiots. Even at the very least, consultation can go a long way. For some of my videos on subjects that needed more scrutiny, such as my video on Bridget as transgender representation or my video on autistic representation, I consulted people of those groups to see if what I was saying was correct and making sure the way I worded things was respectful. And those videos would have been bloody awful if I hadn't. The original scripts were garbage. People connected to these groups understand these groups. They will make your work better. So just remember, if you do have representation of groups that you aren't a part of, it can be very fruitful to include them in the process. Representation is a discussion muddied by the brain rot of the internet. There are further points that could be made on how anything outside of the norm, being cis straight white guy men in the West, is put under more scrutiny and requires justification for being so, or how big companies create dull representative characters for easy brownie points, but sandpapers all their edges out so they say nothing of substance, or the struggle it is to get representation past producers and why you get more authentic representation in indie spheres. However, I've decided to leave those discussions for other epic videos made by sexy people, starting with Rad and ending with Chad. And I guess other less sexy people can talk about them too. This video is just an overview on why representation is important and the annals by which it can be judged. Something for you to take out into your day-to-day life of watching slop that isn't my perfect content. Hopefully you now understand that representation is both healthy in making people of a group feel seen and explore their experiences, but also how people outside of that group are allowed a deeper empathy for that group. We looked at authenticity, and while it is good, it's okay to delve into stereotypes as long as you are respectful to the group. We looked at struggle and how we should show the authentic, unique issues a group faces as opposed to torture porn. We looked at story power, how characters of marginalized groups are usually given less power in the story, and that giving them more story power allows deeper exploration of not only the group, but the whole depth of the character, so they become less of a caricature. We looked at alignment with how sometimes certain groups can be overly represented as evil. We looked at visibility with how some groups aren't given any exploration whatsoever, and the hiding of a group can be more harmful than being outright hostile. We looked at real-world power, where some groups are more pressing for representation based on how marginalized they are in the real world. And finally, we looked at story sovereignty, with giving control to a group in regards to how they are represented. But even if not that, how consultation from a group can make your character immensely more authentic. There are undoubtedly more variables to judge representation by, but this is just a nice list of ones I've collected over my years of media analysis. Hopefully you now have a deeper appreciation for representation, and if not, I'm not inviting you to my family barbecue.